This information is for educational purposes only and is not intended for medical advice.
Welcome to Enhancing the Human. I'm Dr. Jena Gatses, a renowned expert in the field of human enhancement. I've spent decades of my life exploring all aspects of human health, which has allowed me to take people from extreme injury and disability to peak athletic performance. I use cutting-edge advancements, breakthrough technologies, and scientific insights to push the boundaries of human capabilities. The human body is able to do so much more than you think. Let's start enhancing the human. Hello and welcome to Enhancing the Human podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Jena Gatses. Today is an interesting one of my favorites so far. We have Chris Talley. He is a body scientist looking at the biomarkers of our body, what we are deficient in, what we are overloaded in order to optimize our health, in order to make our body more efficient in every way possible. There are things in our everyday lives all day long that toxify us. And if we make small changes every day, we can really change the outcome of our health and change our lives altogether. So it's important to recognize these things, to understand and inform your body so that you can optimize your own health. Let's get to it. So just tell me how you got into everything that you love to do from the beginning. I just am interested, just hearing your passion behind what you do and how we talked about my blood work. I just could hear you're like a kid in a candy store talking about nutrition and the breakdown of my blood work.
As far as how I got involved, initially I was trying to be an astronaut, and I went through a whole bunch of things associated with that. My degree was actually in aerospace physiology, which we're looking at what things happen in a microgravity environment that physiologically are going to be a concern for the human body. In the process of all that, I had worked with some pro athletes, putting myself through school, personal training. That was kind of my way to pay for things. And so some of those athletes wanted to do some of the stuff that was being done with the astronaut candidates, as far as what the all the stuff that would help in a microgravity environment. So you in space, you lose bone density. You tend to have a massive amount of inflammation. That water retention factor is enormous. Loss of muscle mass. The opposite of all the things that for an athlete, you want to have less inflammation, you want to have increased bone density, you want to have more muscle mass. And so those things that you would use to counter what happens in a microgravity environment apply really nicely to the athletic population.
Interesting.
And so that player that I worked with excelled. He told his friends, they did testing, they told their friends. Next thing you know, it's teams and working with some of the highest level athletes on the planet.
Love that. That's so interesting. And have you expanded, or do you stay with like a baseline of what you know and what you're looking for? Or do you have a bigger team? Have you added in anything to your original protocol?
At this point, it's a huge chunk of the NFL. Major League Baseball is turning into that. Basketball is kind of expanding. Where I'm heading with it is building software that's going to do what I'm doing, except better. And I know a lot of people fear being replaced by a robot. I'm looking forward to it. And so, well, and there's still a massive role for the dietitian that works with that person, because
Right.
if you have your phone telling you to go do something, that doesn't mean you're going to actually do it.
Right.
But knowing what you need to do and having that dietitian know that information as far as, hey, these are your specific needs, that's gives you a little bit of an edge in seeing faster results.
And just keeping accountability, having them help you with
Exactly.
that. Because sometimes, people are going through so much, they wear so many hats that they just don't want to take care of one more thing. So I think just like having someone there, you'll never replace the human being as far as the social aspect of that and the love that a person has toward another human being. But I think, like you said, always adapting, always progressing. You're working with high stress environments and how to optimize high stress environments. And I feel like life is a high stress environment, and your perception is your perception. Like, this just physiologically, if you think you're stressed out, you are stressed out, and your hormones will release, based on your emotions. So it's interesting. It applies to every aspect of life.
Yeah, and with that high stress side of it, that's kind of become if I'm picking something that's a specialty area, that would be it. Um, you see some really unique things happen when someone's under a lot of stress for an extended period of time. Acute stress, if you have in a car accident, whatever, that the demands are there, but it's very different than, when you realize you're okay and you're not hurt in the car accident. Everything kind of returns to baseline. And by the end of the day, you're going to be like, oh, okay, I'm going to go have dinner with my friends and tell them this horrible thing that happened. And there's no long-term repercussion. But if you have something happening daily, the toll that takes is enormous. And so we did see again, working with Red Bull for a very long period of time with their sponsored athletes, we had some people, I'll say, propose some very unusual things that they actually ended up accomplishing. And so one of the guys, Carl Meltzer, this is common knowledge, so I'm not talking about anyone's blood test without their information being out there already. But he decided he was an ultra endurance guy, and he's won more 100-mile marathons than anybody else. And he decided he was going to run the Pony Express Trail in 40 days, and that's more than 2,000 miles. I think it's 2,060 miles, which, even though the 60 doesn't sound like a big deal compared to 2,000, if someone asked me to run 60 miles in one day, I'd be like, yeah, not happening. Oh, that's going to send me to the hospital.
Right.
And so, in order to do that in 40 days, though, you're running more than 50 miles every day. And this was a trail. This was not, a track.
A paved, yeah.
And
flat
so
ground.
You've got to stay focused. You don't want to roll your ankle or do whatever. And so
uneven terrain.
He ended up doing it. But going into that, Red Bull was trying to make sure he had all the tools needed to accomplish that. And it was just interesting to see what took place as he went through that, because doing more than 50 miles per day, what human being in the history of human beings have ever done that?
You tracked during also?
Well, and that's what Red Bull did, was they kind of like took care of everything and basically had the equivalent of a van following him. I'm maybe exaggerating that, but it was basically just to monitor him, to supply him with things. And it was fascinating to see what happened. I would say Red Bull has been kind of instrumental in I'll say the high stress research area. We had Felix Baumgartner that jumped out of a space capsule in outer space and skydived back to Earth. That was interesting. And then Project Acheron they did, which they had 4 extreme sports athletes, and they paired them with 2 elite Navy SEALs, and they had to cover, I think it was 120 miles in 8 days in Patagonia. And so part of it was by kayak, part of it was they were at one point climbing over a glacier, and it was
so cool.
But for what was fascinating was that when we got the blood test before and after, the Navy SEALs were actually better nourished at the end of it than they were before. And I went, how did everyone do the same thing? And you guys came back better off than before. And they said, for us, it was a camping trip. It was a hike. They weren't stressed at all because they knew there's no one that's going to shoot at them. There's no, a terrorist that you're trying to go into a stronghold to rescue a hostage, or
like a vacation for their body.
It was
internally.
Literally a vacation.
Yeah.
Where, what the guy that was kind of running the thing, just the SEAL that was in charge said, you don't know where we were before this.
Right.
And so
literally.
For the extreme sports athletes, they had never hiked a glacier. They had never had to kill an animal and cook it or skin it, or knowing what berries to eat. All the things that are survival related stuff. They had zero experience with, and so they were a disaster. They literally came back just wiped out of everything, and it was kind of a interesting experience for me to see what changes for someone who has expertise in an area. And when you first introduce someone into that arena, what happens to them?
How old were the SEALs that were with them?
Mid-30s.
So how long had they been SEALs?
They had been SEALs for a very long time.
Okay.
So these were highly experienced people. The athletes were mid-20s and elite in their sport, but had never done anything like that.
So interesting. I wonder how long it would take to train, because you're basically just training the body to adapt to higher stress environments to the point where that wasn't even stressful for them. It's
Yeah,
so
it
interesting.
was, like I said, they literally viewed it as a camping trip. It was just,
Unbelievable.
they're covering some miles, but they weren't stressed out about it at all. But that kind of laid the groundwork for, well, what else can we learn about people under stress?
Right. What did
And
you learn about the guys that were depleted?
oh, they
What
were
was the most depleted? What did you see? How were their symptoms afterwards as far as their
so
just
they did a functional MRI of their brain before and after, and so they actually saw changes to the structure of the brain, which that was fascinating itself. The need for the essential fats was much greater than what you would see as far as just if someone's saying take some omega 3s. There was an incredible demand for those. It might have been because of that remodeling and structure change of the brain. I don't know. You're dealing with some things outside of what's been researched, and it'd be hard to study that simply because how do you purposefully stress someone without violating every code as far as the ethics involved in running a study?
right.
Someone has to believe that they're in danger in order to actually have that response.
Right.
I know on my end it was interesting just because I had a client approach me about doing. He said that they were trying to come up with an idea for Fox Television, that they wanted to have an event that the world would tune in to see, and they were struggling to come up with something. I said, "Give me a week, I'll come up with something." And so I thought of who do I know and what could I have them do, and so I came up with this bright idea of having a guy jump out of a plane with no parachute, and he was going to do it from 25,000 feet. And so the people I was pitching this to, they were going, "There's no tricks. He's actually going to jump. How is this guy landing?" And
Right.
so
Like, how is he landing?
anyway, we pitched that to Fox. Fox picked it up. So next thing you know, I'm talking to someone I knew from Red Bull, and this was outside of Red Bull, but he ended up jumping on board. So we actually had a guy jump out of a plane with no parachute from 25,000 feet. On my end, part of the reason for wanting to do that was to see when someone's preparing for something that has never been done before, and you're looking at their blood, what changes do you see for that
Yes.
individual? Because think about it, if you know a month from now you're going to jump out of a plane with no parachute,
What happened?
you've got to hit a 100-foot by 100-foot net that you can't even see when you leave the plane because you're so high up. And we're, depending upon GPS and some landmarks to guide yourself to the location.
Human error.
Yeah.
Human error.
And so
That's crazy.
from that perspective, though, it was fascinating to see what happened with him. And I know if he ends up listening to this, he's going to laugh, but the stressors were very similar to someone who's fired at day after day, let's say a SEAL team operator, as far as the demands on your system. Because in the development of that project, we were having a helicopter drop a weight into a net to make sure this net system was going to work right. And one of the drops, the weight went straight through the net and hit the ground. And
He's like standing on the sidelines, like,
well, that was it.
Yes.
And him, his wife, and his kid were watching. And,
Great. Wife and kid.
But no, it was an interesting moment just because I glanced at them; they're to my right, and but this thing just hit the ground in a big cloud of dust.
Oh my God!
So
you're getting real time, objective data on how they're responding to this.
And it was interesting because it actually, the wife later on said that she was less stressed because she said she knew that he's not doing it if they don't straighten this out.
Right.
And so you want to have those failures along the way if something's going to work right, but still, I'm just thinking I don't know that I'd want to see that happen.
No.
With something I'm going to be landing in. But anyway, so yeah, he actually did that, and it was fascinating to see just from a stress perspective. We had him all wired up with everything to monitor what was happening when he did the jump. When the TV interview heading into that, when he was in the plane on the way up there, his heart rate was 120 to 130-ish. And they said, how's everything looking? I said, oh, great. He's not stressed. I was just thinking to myself, his heart rate's elevated. There's certainly some stress going on, but I didn't want to alarm anybody watching this. And it was already a stressful enough thing. Everyone that watched it said it was the most stressful 2.5 minutes of television they've ever seen.
That's crazy. And then if he heard you say his heart rate was elevated, he would have panicked more and it would have elevated more.
Well, and at that point, he wasn't listening. He was up on the plane, and
good.
so he was out of reach of anything he was going to be hearing. But I'm sure he knew that he was having a little
I mean,
anxiety about doing
rightfully
it.
so.
Because, think about it, to step out of a plane at 25,000 feet where you've got an oxygen mask on because there's not enough air for you to breathe, and you know that you have no parachute. There's no...
and you can't practice this.
No. And all he was doing was we were having him do jumps above the net. He wasn't landing in the net, but he was actually falling toward it, and then he'd pull his parachute at the last second.
Okay.
So he had practice runs over the target.
Okay, got it.
But there was a person out in a field full of rattlesnakes that actually had to push a button to release this 100-foot net. If that guy got bit and goes down, we would have had a problem. There were a lot of factors.
On the ground, you're like, oh no. I love this though.
But anyway, it was interesting to see, though, just with applying that stressor environment to other people. Just a few years back, a woman named Leah Denton decided she's going to row from Japan to San Francisco in a rowboat unsupported. And so Leah did a training row where she rowed down the coast of California, and she has stayed 50 miles offshore and just 50 miles, but
right.
in a rowboat.
No big deal.
And so we had looked at tests before and after she did that. We figured out, well, okay, what are her nutritional needs? How many calories is she got to burn? And so she decided, well, I'm going to do a training row to Hawaii from San Francisco. Again, insane.
So crazy.
And so we got everything figured out as far as what she was going to need in order to do that. She headed out on this row. This was in the middle of the pandemic. And she was concerned about, what if I catch COVID and I don't know for, at the time they were saying 14 days and whatever. And she's like, what if I'm out in the middle of nowhere? And
they're like, you have to quarantine.
Well, yeah, but if she was to come down with it, there's no medical care coming. And,
right.
And so that was a little bit of a concern. 3 days into that trip, she gets notified that one of her good friends has passed away and washed up on a shore, another ocean rower.
Wow.
And then about a month into that row, which it was going to take about 3 months to get to Hawaii, Hurricane Douglas went over her. And so she was in 40-foot swells. The boat that she had was supposed to self-right if it got turned over. The first time it flipped over, it did. The second time, it did not. And so she's clinging to the underside of her boat in the middle of the Pacific. No help is coming. And so she had to figure out, well, how am I going to actually get this boat right side up? And there was a whole bunch of...
Her friend had just died. There's so many things going through your head.
And so she did get it right side up. Shortly after that, she's still sorting out all the problems with her boat. And all big ships out in the middle of the Pacific have a system where they will announce their presence on radar where you know that this ship is coming your direction. That's how they avoid collisions. The Navy, though, will shut that off if they're running operations just because they don't want people tracking their warships. And so, to her surprise, all of a sudden she hears over a megaphone, this is Warship 059, are you in distress?
Gosh.
Well, she's in the middle of nowhere in the Pacific in her rowboat. And so she thought to herself, well, I could get off this boat right now and get on that thing and go home. But she was determined that she was going to do this. And so she stuck it out. As she got closer to Hawaii, a school of tuna had started following her boat, which at first she thought was fun. But then tiger sharks showed up and they started going after the tuna, and the tuna were hiding behind her boat. So the tiger sharks were ramming her boat.
Oh my
And
God.
so she was having to hit the tiger sharks in the head with her oar. And these were, 10-foot tiger sharks. They weren't small fish. And so, she was hearing bumps in the night when she was trying to sleep against the side of her boat. So when she landed in Hawaii, we literally got blood drawn that day. And so it was amazing to see what happened to her during that row, because even though I felt pretty good, it was like, hey, we got everything addressed. We know what happened when you rode from Northern California to Southern California. We couldn't account for the constant stress that took place on that row. And, she was pretty much deficient in every B vitamin. Heavy metals had accumulated because she had burned through so many of the nutrients that would be essential for your liver and kidneys to remove those things. basically she ended up kind of shutting down for, I'd say, a month after that row where she couldn't even function. And it was brutal. She didn't want to talk to anybody. And you would think you'd just be celebrating, I did this
Right.
amazing thing. And for her, again, she's getting ready to do this row from Japan to San Francisco, which is almost double that distance. And at least we know more now than she did before. But it is fascinating to see what happens under stress.
What was depleted that could help her remove the heavy metals from her liver?
Yeah, so this stuff called glutathione that would be a lot of boutique shops will do glutathione related therapies. That score came back super low. So she was needing all of the things that would be involved in detoxification, all the sulfur containing amino acids, taurine, cysteine, methionine. She was depleted in those, which those would be the things that would be used to produce glutathione. The B vitamins are involved in that pathway. B6 was non-existent. It was just magnesium was super low. So things that you hear about, well, if you're under stress, take some magnesium. Yeah, I actually agree with that. It did play a role. And then also with the B vitamins, when you go to a drugstore and you see Stress Pack 5000 or whatever they name the thing, and you look at the back and it's just a bunch of B vitamins. Well, yeah, there is a need for those when someone's under stress.
Interesting. As far as glutathione, I do a lot of research on glutathione just because it's so detrimental to our health and our immune system. Have you heard anything about coffee enemas? Just interested in
I've
that.
heard it. I
Don't know
dealing
much
with the
about
pro
it.
sports world,
Yeah.
they don't.
I'm telling you though, some of them,
Yeah.
because I help them, they're like, I'll do whatever you say. I'm like, I'm not telling you to do this. I like to explore information that it may be Eastern medicine, but it's not, funded by big pharma. So it's not very looked at. But I like to do things, just anything. That's why how I found you is just trying to find ways to help the human body. So it's so interesting to study at that level. Do you have a lab out there, or I know you send off the things to a lab and then you get the information,
Yeah.
but do you have a research lab?
So the lab that I'm using is Genova Diagnostics. So when people have blood drawn, it gets shipped to that laboratory. They run the analysis. We get the information back. With the account that I have set up with them, it is a research account. So when a team wants to actually do research on their players, we can get that whole thing in spreadsheet format for the team. Their analytics guys have at it. That's been fascinating just to interact with them, just because I get to glean some new things, and whatever each team comes up with, I mean, that's their own information. But once it leaks out to everyone else, it's like I could talk about that.
Definitely.
But that's been interesting. On my end, on the hardware end, we're doing a bunch of work to develop point of care systems where you'd prick your finger, you'd put 5 drops of blood on a slide, you'd be able to get results back very quickly. One of the big problems with sending it off to get it analyzed is it just takes forever to get the results back.
So when are you looking to launch that? Near
It's
future?
probably still 2 years away. It's I have friends jokingly calling it Theranos 2.0 because it's doing a whole series of tests on a chip. But this is doable. So we will have that available. On my end, before that's actually going to be available, I need to actually finish the software that will do the analysis. And just as when we talked about a test, there's an interaction with the person where you need some feedback to know why they're coming back low in this. So let's say the woman that did the road to Hawaii, if I knew nothing about what she was doing, I would just think, well, she must not be eating any foods that have B vitamins or magnesium, and I would just put together this random program that would, in no way, it would probably be less than what she was already getting to start with if she ran out of these things on that program. So you need to have some feedback in order to put a program together for someone, so that software would have to have that interaction where there's questions asked to get that info to make the right dietary adjustment.
That's going to be amazing. And then with me, we did my blood work, and we're surprised at how low everything was. I think I remember you saying, like, I don't know how you're functioning. I don't know how I'm functioning. I want to do it again just because I tried to be better, but it's hard. But you said, even with allergies and things, I don't think people understand this. You can develop allergies. So I've seen this before where if the system's hyper stressed, someone will be inflamed by certain things that normally wouldn't inflame them just because their system's overloaded. But with my stuff, I know I had dairy was over 2,000 that it inflamed me. It was supposed to be under 10, I believe. I don't know. What is the unit of measurement on that?
Nanograms per milliliter. So that's
I was above 2,000.
Yeah. I don't remember your test, but that's interesting that you remember that one.
I do. It's significant.
Yeah.
So it's supposed to be under 10 and it was over 2,000. So you said if I stop for 3 months, it would completely reset my system and it would help bring that number down.
Yeah. And since the last time you went through that, you're referencing the IgG antibodies on that one.
Mm-hmm.
So what we figured out there was that the IgG antibodies, if you're sick and you eat a food repeatedly while you're sick, you're much more likely to end up developing a negative response to that food.
Interesting.
And so hypothetically, as far as why that would happen, I think what's going on is that your immune system is spooled up to fight off the infection. If you eat, I'm going to pick a random food, but let's say plums, the response to the plums, your immune system is seeing something that isn't human and it goes, what is this? And you keep eating plum after plum. Well, at some point it starts ramping up production of antibodies to that particular food. Problem is then once that happens, if you eat that food a few times a week, well, your immune system is going, we have not gotten rid of this. Keep making more antibodies. And next thing you know, you end up with a greater than 2,000 on the report.
Interesting.
So dairy is a little more common to see that happen with. Eggs are fairly common just because they're in a lot of things. But the downside with that is you see it takes a bite out of your natural testosterone production.
Mm-hmm.
And
I had very low testosterone.
Okay. And so when you get those things corrected, you see that person's testosterone rebound. And I think in large part just because if you're looking at when an athlete's testosterone would be lowest, it would be while they're sick. And if your immune system is doing a bunch of work to produce antibodies to a random food that you really shouldn't, it's just your immune system is saying, hey, there's a problem here. She's fighting something off, shut down testosterone production.
Got it.
So that's been interesting.
What do you feel about testosterone supplementation? Because I feel like that's jumped too soon, whereas where you went down the rabbit hole of like, okay, let's see what organs are impacted. Let's try to fix the actual problem versus just masking it with a synthetic testosterone.
The problem with the TRT, testosterone replacement therapy, is once you're on it, your own natural production is going to shut off. And you're going to see if someone's been on it for an extended period of time, their production is way down from, if they went off of it, it's going to take them a long time to rebound. Anything where you become dependent on something, I'm always fairly cautious about. There are a lot of people that do that. It's been fascinating that the people that have the highest testosterone scores I've seen are not athletes, but an executive that just goes to their specialty care doctor that's putting them on TRT, and they end up with some crazy high score where it's a 1,000, 1,500, or 2,000, something crazy for a testosterone score, which you never see naturally occurring in even the most elite athlete. And this 50-year-old business executive should not have a testosterone score above the highest performance athletes on the planet. So
that can't be good for the system.
No.
Have you seen any effects with that over time?
Yeah, testosterone has a weird impact on cholesterol where and ApoA1 is what the name is on this, and ApoB. You start to see some wacky things happen at either extreme with testosterone, if it's really low or if it's too high. So from a heart disease perspective, I'd say there's probably some risk. As far as prostate enlargement, there's risk.
For the too high end?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so if your body is naturally making it, that's, if we can get your body to make a little more naturally, I don't think that's dangerous at all.
Right.
ability for your body to produce testosterone is dependent upon a bunch of different nutrients, and some things would inhibit production. So the people that are on the testosterone replacement therapies, I tend to see that when we get their test results back, they're low or high in all the things that would directly affect testosterone, which is probably how they ended up there in the first place, where their testosterone was too low and someone prescribed it without looking at, well, why is it low?
Right.
Um,
And that's
So mercury, as an example, it not only interferes with the message from your brain to your body as far as production of testosterone, but as far as the production of cortisol from progesterone, um, you see the enzyme responsible for that cortisol production, the activity of it spikes if there's a bunch of mercury. And so instead of that progesterone being able to head downstream and go help with testosterone production, it's being sent in a direction of a hormone you really don't want to see high levels of.
interesting because that helps get rid of the mercury.
Well, the mercury would be responsible for the increase in production of the cortisol.
Got it.
The cortisol being a stress hormone,
Mm-hmm.
somewhat undesirable thing to see high levels of all the time.
Right.
And so, if you can get mercury out, you tend to find an improvement in testosterone. And a lot of my athletes refer to what they had before as mercury belly, because it's just something where their mercury was high. They tend to hold on to more fat. You get the mercury out, that body fat situation improves. A lot of them, it's from just eating a ton of sushi. And, because athletes have a pretty good income, sushi is certainly on their menu on a regular basis. And they kind of end up with higher mercury scores than the average person. With marijuana use, I know that kind of has been a interesting topic, because now with legalization in a lot of areas, there's some belief that that's healthy. And the concern there is I'm just seeing some really high heavy metal scores. And, the NBA in particular, you tend to see some pretty high scores for things. And it's just they smoke a bit more marijuana than other athletes.
And it's
But
not really regulated. There's not a lot of regulations on
no,
marijuana and like how you grow it. People sometimes there's a disconnect where, if they're using pesticides or they're using some kind of toxin on the plant and you inhale or eat or whatever to that plant, that goes inside of you. So, but there's not a lot of regulations because there's ignorance around that because it's newer.
absolutely. And
Very
even within that, if it's one thing if you're separating the CBD, CBN, CBG, those things are
helpful.
are promising.
Yeah.
And that's I don't think a problem at all. It's just when you're actually smoking marijuana, kind of get into a different space.
Interesting. What about ingesting? As far as if it was the THC, not the molecules that are actually beneficial to our
I
health.
haven't seen enough with the edible side of it, because with athletes, for the most part, they're going to smoke weed. That's
Got it.
where the direction they're going to head. But that is interesting, though, to see if there's a difference between what's inhaled into your lungs and exhaled, what's absorbed from that, versus if you just swallow something, what's absorbed from the gut.
Right.
Um,
Interesting. I love that. What about you? I like how mercury too. There's mercury in things that people wouldn't realize there's mercury in, or just heavy metals in general. The toxins, the candles that we're using in our houses, just toxifying ourselves, baking inside of it.
Yeah, and even on that end, incense. I've had someone that was really big on using a lot of incense, and they ended up with high heavy metals, and they were trying to get themselves to relax, and instead they had more anxiety, and it was because they had very high heavy metal levels.
Interesting.
But yeah, with the mercury, besides fish, and with the fish, if someone's trying to make sure they're not getting exposed to a bunch of mercury on a regular basis, the top offenders there would be swordfish, any of the tunas, so albacore, bluefin, yellowfin, ahi, toro. If it's sushi-related tuna, you're going to get mercury. Halibut, sea bass, in the southeast, grouper would be an issue. Yellowtail has a lot. And so, unfortunately, it's usually the things that people pick out on a sushi menu to
Regularly.
eat. But but you also find mercury in big, or concern with mercury with even just getting a flu shot. And people don't know that they can ask for the thimerosal-free version of that. And so, yes, it costs you an extra $30 to get that over the one that has the mercury, but it's nice to not get a big dose of mercury.
Right.
A lot of tattoo inks have a bunch of mercury. And again, athletes a lot of them are covered with tattoos. So you see some things from that. The tattoos.
The tattoos are, go ahead. I want to say something about the tattoos.
Oh, go ahead.
So I did dissection in school. I picked my school based on the cadaver lab being 24 hours. So I could always go and like find neat things. So with people with tattoos, all of the lymph nodes in the area were the color of the tattoo.
I didn't know that.
Isn't that crazy?
That's fascinating.
I'm like, I love these fun facts. Even like you have some the greatest stories ever, but isn't that so interesting? Because then you're seeing that the body's looking at it like a toxin and it's trying to get rid of it. And we're overloading our system. Imagine people that are head to toe in tattoos.
Yeah. And also it's so poorly regulated that,
yes.
Some of the inks that are the more vibrant colors, there's just an assortment of heavy metals in there. I know one guy was loaded full of cadmium and we tracked it down to the tattoo ink, but it,
so interesting.
Had another person come back with high cadmium just from, he had a bunch of skull rings on all his fingers. This was a baseball player. And we were trying to figure out where the heck he was getting exposed to the cadmium because he didn't smoke, didn't no
dip or anything.
Yeah, none of the things that would be typical sources. And when I was looking at his hand, I said, "Where did you get the rings?" So we started in a conversation. He said, "Oh, these two leave like a weird blackish circle around my finger." And so I said, "You might want to get those looked at." So he tracked down some lab to actually see what they were plated with because he had no idea. And they were, those two were cadmium plated.
What?
And so he was just wearing rings that were cadmium plated, absorbing a tiny bit through his skin every day, ended up with a very high cadmium score. It was shutting down his testosterone. He wasn't happy, but we got rid of those two rings and his testosterone came back up when we got the cadmium out.
Unbelievable. That is so interesting. But if you don't look at that and you just right away you want to supplement because you're told that your testosterone's low, you're not fixing the problem. And then you're toxifying yourself on top of now supplementing with something that's synthetic.
Exactly.
And I wanted to ask again, because there's a lot of talk around conspiracy around the mercury being in the vaccines, but that's not the case. We look at science
not with
and that's
the COVID
100%
vaccines. So with the flu shot and with a lot of vaccines for international travel.
Yes.
So, yellow fever, things that are, those vaccines, you can ask for the thimerosal-free version.
I was going to ask you what it's called again.
And even for parents with their kids, if they're going to get them vaccinated, that's an easy thing to request the mercury-free version of it because there's no sense in injecting a kid with a bunch of mercury.
No. And that is detrimental to the nervous system.
Yeah, brain and nervous system.
Yeah.
So it's I think if you're looking for simple things that can be done, the concern about the vaccines with kids is more so, at least my level of concern would be more so with the mercury,
yes,
than the actual vaccination to polio or measles or whatever it is.
Right, because that's what's reacting with the system.
Yeah.
So that's it's good to know that because a lot of people don't know these things, and that's instead of having ignorance around it or fear around it, it's just understanding what's going on, but also understanding your right to pick different things. So I don't think that's an option or that's offered. So just being your own health advocate and understanding these things is so important because it's not good to give kids a dose like that at such a young age.
Yeah.
And so I appreciate you saying that. That's so important. So important. What about, we said candles. What else? Where else can you find heavy metals? I remember looking up even carpets, things. I remember with my one patient that we talked to, we both talked to him together on the phone. He was ready to get rid of all of his carpets. He's like, because we said the color in the carpet is because I looked up all this stuff and there's so many places that heavy metals can be found and we don't know this. So we think we're doing better for our health and sometimes we're polluting ourselves.
Well, and a week from when we're recording this, I'm giving a presentation to the NFL Medical Association. And the discussion, a big part of it will be root cause analysis. And when you're looking at, I'll just pick arsenic, for example, you kind of make a tree of, what are the possible sources that result in this arsenic score being high? And People don't really consider that when they're getting gluten-free products, that a lot of them are made with rice. Well, rice has a little bit of arsenic. So if you have a ton of gluten-free products, a lot of times you end up with higher arsenic because you're eating so much rice or rice product. Dust has a significant amount of arsenic in it. So if someone goes surfing all the time and they're on the beach and the wind is blowing and they're inhaling some of the dust from that, surfers end up with elevated arsenic. And so you start to kind of build this foundation of what sport is this person in? You ask some questions about what things they do. That root cause analysis of how did we get here where we have this high arsenic? And then are you missing the nutrients that you need to remove this? And is it possible that you were just so short on those nutrients that arsenic accumulated over time?
Through just normal,
just a tiny
introduction
bit
of the
you get
chemical.
exposed to every day.
Yes, interesting. So with arsenic, what are the things that help you get rid of arsenic?
Well, and with all the heavy metals, if your body can produce more glutathione, you're going to see an improvement. There's not a sports certified version of NAC on the market, but NAC does do a fantastic job of kind of providing you with what you would need to maximize your glutathione production. I would say that the nutrients that I see needed, a lot of them are in cilantro and garlic. And so if you look online on what helps remove heavy metals, cilantro and garlic are always mentioned, but they're not looking at it from a nutritional perspective. That's just kind of, the internet rumor that that's going to help, but it actually does help. The glycine that's in collagen or gelatin or even beef bone broth, that would help in the removal of heavy metals as well. And so if someone came back with a low glycine score, we'd have a discussion about, hey, you could get this sports certified collagen product that's going to be a great way to help remove the heavy metals.
Have you seen with an all vegan diet any difference in just what people are deficient in?
Absolutely. And
compared to meat
if I'm
eaters?
looking at the most nutritionally deficient people, it's always vegans. And I say that, in the interest of full disclosure, I'm pretty close to vegetarian just for ethical reasons. I feel bad killing an animal if I don't need to. I do eat fish once in a while, but I haven't had poultry or red meat in decades. I would be healthier if I did. And I know most people in that community don't say that. The vegan community is talking about how that's the healthier way to go. I'm fully aware that I'd be healthier if I ate some red meat and poultry. I just kind of cut it off at fish just because it's as far up the food chain as I'm willing to go to make sure I stay healthy. But with vegans, iron becomes an issue. B12 becomes an issue. Yes, you can find iron in some vegetables, but it's a form that's very poorly absorbed, where the form that's in red meat is absorbed extremely well. That B12, I see that all the time where that's a problem with women that are looking to have kids soon. That veganism is not the way to head into pregnancy. You're going to end up with some issues, and it may have a negative impact on not only fertility, but if they did get pregnant, on how healthy that kid would turn out.
Interesting. Does the quality of the meat matter? I know USDA versus just regular.
Yeah, so if you're comparing fast food red meat with a grass-fed organic pasture-raised steak, the organic pasture-raised, the grass-fed steak is going to be much more healthy. As far as iron content, you're still going to find iron in the bad quality meat. It's present and it would be absorbed. It's just what else are you getting with it that you don't want?
Right. And risk versus reward.
Yeah.
If you're that deficient in the iron, it's good to get it from somewhere versus not have it just because you don't want to eat the meat. Interesting. That's so interesting. As far as I know, we talked about the IVF earlier, but just I've seen a lot of people struggle with having babies and just being healthy enough to be fertile. So as far as the hormones and things that you've seen and the deficiencies you've seen related to just trouble with having a child, what have you seen?
That's been an interesting area because that wasn't originally my expertise, and then because it went well for a few people, that they ended up, the facility that they were working with for IVF ended up referring a lot of people. Next thing you know, they're referring their friends, and pretty soon I've got pro athletes, I've got military, I've got men and women that are going through IVF, and that's been kind of an interesting category that's grown a lot. With the deficiencies and the things that improve outcomes, if any heavy metal is high, you always see a problem with that person with egg quality and sperm quality as well. So with both men and women, just looking at, if I'm picking the ones that would be the biggest issues, it would be mercury, arsenic, cadmium, lead, aluminum a little bit. One of the other things that has been an issue is gadolinium, and gadolinium is what they use as a contrast agent for MRIs. Sometimes when someone's
I just used that.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
What did you have?
Brain cyst in my brain, and I remember being like, I don't feel right about this, and I kept the sheet, and it was that medication. I was going to look it up, but yes, go on about the negative impacts of this.
There's macrocyclic and there's ionic or linear agents, and so the linear ones, you see more of the gadolinium escape from the structure that's holding it, as far as what they're injecting you with. Where the macrocyclic ones are they hold up a bit better. I don't know which one was used, but if you see the trade name on it, we could talk about this later. But
okay, perfect.
We can see which one it was.
I have the sheet. I will find it.
But anyway, that because a lot of the women that have had difficulty with having a child, they'll start with an ultrasound, but then some of them have gone through MRIs to look for, well, is there something going on with the structure of the uterus, the ovaries, and so by injecting them with this contrast agent, they may have created a worse outcome than if they hadn't done that to start with, just because some people really struggle to clear it. I don't want to create a panic where everyone thinks contrast agents are horrible.
No, but just understanding the risks and rewards from it and making a decision.
I'm saying this in full knowledge that you're probably going to have the bad version of gadolinium, because
for sure, I knew it when I saw it.
When you need to have a really high definition picture, the linear agents give you a higher definition picture than the macrocyclic. And so they may have wanted a very high definition picture of what's going on. And in that case, that would be the way to go. There's been a fair amount of success with using zeolite to get rid of the gadolinium.
Interesting.
So,
I study a lot about zeolite.
Okay.
Yeah. And if you have anything else to say on zeolite, I would love that. But I instantly think about parasites too, with the heavy metals and the zeolite, because zeolite helps with parasites as well. Have you seen a connection there?
And I don't have a whole lot of experience with parasites, just because in the U.S., you just don't see that. It's a rare situation where someone ends up with exposure, and they usually were somewhere else and they came back with a parasite than getting it in the U.S. So I don't have the zeolite and parasite experience, but
it doesn't help with the heavy metals.
It certainly helps, especially in combination with that NAC. And so I guess if someone did have high heavy metals, that would be something to look at. Most labs can run some heavy metal testing. Convincing a doctor to check the boxes to test for arsenic, mercury, lead, that might be a tough sell for some doctors to be checking those boxes when someone's just going in for a routine physical. But it would be worth it if someone does eat a fair amount of seafood, see if the mercury is an issue, if they're eating a fair amount of rice, dealing with dusty environments.
Oats too have a lot of pesticides and heavy metals, I've heard.
So with oats, if it's organic, you don't have to worry about the pesticides, and the heavy metal content in the oats is much lower than with rice.
Okay.
Anyway, that could be interesting if someone's struggling on the fertility end.
Yeah.
To investigate, is there something nutritional that's an issue? And then
just the medical end too. Why you say they don't check the boxes, but to be so detrimental if these, molecules are in our bodies, why aren't these part of the protocol and the standard of, just checkups?
And it's an issue of how much it costs. And, when you start checking boxes, you add to the price of the test, and the doctor would have to substantiate why they're running these tests. And right now, there's not a CPT code that's going to say, well, his testosterone came back a little bit low, so therefore we should test for heavy metals. They're more likely to say, here's a prescription and go get some testosterone cream or gel, and that there you go. Because it does fix the problem. It's just you haven't fixed the cause.
Right. More of a Band-Aid.
Yeah.
And then, which could also cause other issues.
Oh,
How long
certainly.
have you been doing the IVF work with your different patients?
7 years at this point, which
Oh, okay.
it's been an area that has grown a huge amount. There's the age that people are running into trouble having kids seems to be getting younger and younger and younger. And some of
Yes.
these people are late 20s or early 30s, which it seems like that's a pretty early age to be struggling.
Yes.
I've
seen that more now than ever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so with if I'm looking at uh, interesting newer things that I've seen with COVID, I never used to see low scores in a few essential fats prior to 2020, and now I'm starting to see these scores low all the time. And so the three that are coming back low since COVID got rolling are docosapentanoic acid, which kind of is the forgotten omega-3, dihomogamma-linolenic acid, that would be one of your omega-6s that's needed to produce a lot of the reproductive hormones, and lignoceric acid, which is really important for brain and nervous system. It's involved in the sphingolipids that are part of the nervous system. But those three keep coming back low frequently now, and I wonder if that's having some negative impact on fertility or the outcome from pregnancy, where you're more likely to see some birth defect you wouldn't have seen otherwise.
Right. That's so interesting. As far as the patients that are showing these numbers, can you correlate anything between them as far as male, female, anything that you've seen?
It would be on the female side. For the men,
Obviously,
in
yeah.
the sports world, though, that's huge, because if someone has had COVID a couple of times, before I even see the report, I already know what we're going to be dealing with, because those three scores are going to come back low.
Interesting.
And with the docosapentanoic acid, that one's not easy to find. You do find it in wild-caught salmon. When COVID first got rolling and I first started seeing those low scores, I kind of had to go digging, going, okay, what food can I work in? I know fish have a little bit, but what fish has the most? Because it's just not an essential fat you really saw a whole lot of attention given. And it turned out it was a fish called menhaden. And I was completely unfamiliar with that fish. And
Never heard of
so
it.
I thought, well, I'm just going to tell people to have a bunch of menhaden. And then when I went Googling menhaden, I saw, oh, well, that's used as chum to attract fish to a boat. And no one's
Amazing.
going to actually
Perfect.
eat this menhaden. And so there is menhaden oil, though, that basically they go, just like they'd catch anchovies or sardines, they'd catch menhaden, process it, and that menhaden oil is loaded full of that particular one. And so that's something you can get if you go on Amazon or whatever, online, if searching for menhaden oil, you'll find sources that are intended for human consumption.
So it's just the female hormones and numbers that matter with that? The males?
Well, so on the male end, if those scores are low, so that docosapentanoic acid is your reservoir for EPA and DHA, the two main omega-3s that everyone focuses on. But it does play a role in nervous system function and myelin production as well. It's involved in everything from reaction times to coordination, anything speed related. You certainly don't want to be low in that. So for an elite athlete, that's not good. That dihomogamma-linolenic acid, I don't know why that one's been low after COVID. the enzyme that's responsible for producing that, this delta 6 elongase enzyme, that is inhibited by illness. And so I'm not sure why COVID affects it more than other illnesses, but that would shut down your production of it if you had COVID. And maybe that's what's been responsible for the significantly lower scores.
It's interesting because with other sicknesses, have you seen those numbers
No.
come back up?
And they come back up, and
right. So this is different with COVID.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So it may have a bigger detrimental impact on that delta 6 elongase enzyme. And what you'll see is they'll end up with a high gamma-linolenic acid, which I know I'm going into stuff that your
I love this.
listeners may not want to hear.
I love this.
So
I love
this
this.
gamma-linolenic acid score will come back high. In fact, this is one that mercury interferes with too. So whenever I see elevated mercury, when I'm flipping through the report to kind of make my notes before talking with someone, if I see high mercury, I already know I'm going to need to include the flow chart with that. I literally attach it to the email before I even go to the page of their report that has this particular fat in it, because anytime there's an elevated mercury score, you're going to see a high this gamma-linolenic acid GLA and a very low DGLA, what it gets converted into, because that delta 6 elongase gets interfered with by mercury, but COVID would also interfere with that. The problem is that DGLA, I'm just compressing dihomogamma-linolenic acid into something easy to say.
Pretty impressive how you kept saying it. You got it down.
And so that DGLA is needed to produce a lot of the hormones that would be considered anabolic, the things that would let you see results from a workout. It also is involved in production of a lot of the things that would lower LDL cholesterol. And so there could be a benefit there. There'd be benefit on the as far as the reduction in inflammation. In that flow chart that I have associated with that, I even put decreased joint pain and improved recovery from high intensity exercise, just because you see a benefit there by getting that score to come up. But certainly if someone's trying to put on muscle or lose fat, it's much easier to do. Bone mineral content increases, so bone density is higher. It does make me wonder if years from now we're going to see that, hey, after COVID, we started seeing an increase in osteoporosis because bone density was low, because that DGLA wasn't at the same level. That, there's a whole chain.
Well, as far as the myelin sheath too, if you think about it, memory, and then as far as Alzheimer's, and to have younger people showing a deficiency in myelin is very. I haven't heard of anything like that. Seen younger individuals showing that before. Well, and it's been
interesting because and I don't want to wander into like territory that's controversial, but whenever you get a vaccination for COVID, you see a little drop in those numbers and they come right back up afterwards. I think what could be happening though is if you get vaccinated and boosted a couple of times and then you catch COVID, well, because your scores have come down a little bit and they haven't had that chance to return back to baseline, and now you throw COVID in on top of it, you see something happen that they wouldn't have experienced before. And so some of the people that are blaming the vaccines for problems, I don't think it's necessarily the vaccine. It's the combination of a number of moving parts that have driven some nutrients to incredibly low levels. Because when you're talking about long COVID, past, and so I kind of wonder if, well, maybe we're seeing the symptoms that are described as long COVID because of the drop in nutrients that you'd see afterwards.
Right. And I saw a lot during COVID of just the protocol of when to get the vaccine, that it wasn't really tracked. We didn't know, because some people were getting them too close together. And then you think about, like you were saying earlier with the mercury, you said there wasn't mercury in that one?
There's not mercury in any of those shots.
Can you explain why there is mercury? Isn't it something to bind so that the body can absorb it?
So two reasons. One is you need something that's going to be a little bit of an irritant for any vaccine to work. But more importantly, as a preservative, when you're trying to roll out a flu shot that's going to be sent all over the country, putting it in refrigerated, specialized vehicles is not ideal. And so that's why they charge more for that, because you've got to handle it very differently if it's the non-mercury version of it.
So if you condition yourself with the Navy SEALs, basically you're not creating that environment where you're high stress. So if you control your mind and your ability to condition within an environment, it doesn't have to be such a high stress environment.
Yes and no. So a group I'm talking to also next week is a bunch of startup executives. And most people don't experience the stress of a startup like the CEO or founder of the startup. And
Yes.
so you see some really, really unique things happen with their blood tests that are not all that different than the woman that had the sharks ramming her boat or the guy jumping from a plane with no parachute. And it's different because there's not a life-threatening aspect of a startup, but it may be perceived as being life-threatening because everything they have is invested in this. They've got other people's money. The wife is getting ready to divorce this guy. That's whatever. And there's so much going on where the stay-at-home mom that is trying to get the startup rolling is so overloaded with the kids are failing in school. There's whatever things are happening. All of those variables from life add up to a very high stress environment, and the demands just change radically when you're in that situation.
And over time, you said you've seen, as far as I'm like, for myself, what are the things you're seeing long term with these high stress environments and situations?
Yeah, so if I'm picking out the things that would be most critical, I mean, antioxidants you kind of rip through. So that's when people are talking about trying to get your fresh fruits and vegetables in, big advantage to that. With the heavy metals, I do see that those are more likely to accumulate with someone that's under a lot of stress. And so if you are looking at working in some cilantro and garlic and beef bone broth, these would be healthy things to include. The B vitamins, certainly, that's a huge area. With B vitamins, I'm always careful as far as the type of B vitamin, because there's an active and an inactive form of all of the B vitamins. And so the active form works great. Problem is it doesn't hold up very well. So a lot of companies, if they want to have an extended shelf life once you open that bottle, they're going to use the inactive form that's also less expensive. And so, as an example, I will kind of glance at a label. I usually just look at B6 to see what form of B6 is in there. And if I see that it's P5P or pyridoxine 5-phosphate, that's the active form. If it just says pyridoxine HCl, that's the inactive. And so you kind of know, well, okay, did someone put some care into this? Yes. At least it's the active
form. Or is it just built for profits?
Exactly.
How can people find out more about these different things, inactive versus active form, and what's best for them?
That's a big area.
Is there a website I can go to learn all of this?
I wish there was. Someone should probably do that. I don't know if
right?
That's out
I'll
there.
get on it in my 75 other things I have.
I know, but no, it is really tough to keep, because people ask me, what book can I read or what site can I go to?
Because the regulations are always changing too.
Well, that and, so even in the sports world, you'll see everyone's contract, if it's football, baseball, or basketball, basically says that they can't use any product that's not NSF certified for sport. There are a ton of amazing products that are not NSF certified for sport. It doesn't mean that the ones that are used by the pro athletes are better than those other products. It's simply that they've been tested that they don't have anything that athlete can test positive for on a drug test.
Right.
And so with CBD products, CBN, CBG, it's very difficult to navigate that process to get something approved. It's not because the product is dangerous in some way. It's simply just, it's tough to navigate that. So I know I have to be careful in the pro athlete world just because I want to make sure that I'm not suggesting or inferring that someone should take something that isn't NSF certified for sport.
Right.
Even within that, though, that NSF sport certification, there's Informed Sport that's a competitor to NSF. I would say they're very similar as far as that certification. It's just everyone's contract has NSF certified for sport. And if you take something outside of that and you test positive, your contract is void. And
Wow.
for an athlete that signed a
It's everything.
a $700 million contract, you're not going to take something outside of that.
Right. Oh, that's very interesting.
But
But as far as the quality of how the body can absorb something, it's just basically like you said, looking at the quality of the product and the ingredients, understanding a little bit more about that. And then with the CBD, just it being 100% pure isolate. I don't think I've ever seen that on the market at all. Have you?
yeah, I haven't. And I know when I was talking with the founders, they were pretty excited about coming out with something that
Pure.
had a very high absorption rate.
Yes.
So that's that's going to be interesting to see how that does as it rolls out.
Mm.
The CBG and CBN, those are really interesting. CBN, especially on the sleep side, CBG on the focus side. If you're looking at the things that could potentially be a benefit, that's going to be a big area very quickly. And it's unfortunate that it's so hard to extract and purify CBG and CBN as opposed to CBD is pretty easy to navigate. So that is something that, from a advisory position as far as the range supplements, again, cautiously making sure that I'm not going to get someone testing positive on some test or
You're
something.
like, oh gosh.
But it's
Yes.
it is a fascinating area, and I think that could really take off with the non-pro athlete crowd that is able to take something that isn't NSF certified for sport simply because, for any company to navigate that, you'd end up having to charge $1,000 a bottle by the time you got done with getting all the certification associated with that.
Wow. And I know the founders, and I know they care about the
Yeah.
quality of what they do. They care about even the technology being nanotechnology to where the body can absorb it, it can recognize it, and it can absorb it more easily than other products. But did you know that they're doing like a percentage of all sales goes to a healthcare fund for veterans?
I didn't know that, but
So
that's cool.
they're unbelievable. This is like their side gig, and they just want to do this because they know that it can help people. They've seen it help people before. They want to do it in the highest quality possible. But just the fact that they are taking a percentage just to help veterans is beyond what I could ever imagine with these people. It's crazy. I love their hearts. They're such beautiful people. They really are. And she really cares about what she does and what she puts into the world. So it's interesting. But name the two, because have you heard too? Because I want to have people understand more about CBD, CBN, and CBG, just because I feel like people are very ignorant around the topic. They don't quite understand it. So you said CBG was more for sleep.
Other way, so
Got it.
CBG would be more on the mental focus side.
Got it. And then CBN is more for the sleep.
And it's just those isolates are so difficult to separate from everything else. And because of that, you have to charge more. I mean, it's just a lot of work to isolate that. But now there's just starting to get to be some products that have high concentrations of CBG and CBN. And that range product line, I think, was interesting for me to look at just because it's like, wow, okay, well, if you are able to actually separate this and put it in high levels, that could certainly have an impact. And there's people that struggle with sleep. And, again, with that founder community for startups, the sleep is probably the biggest problem they suffer. And it's just, if you go to bed with 20 things whirling around in your head and you're trying to just shut down and
We know all about
I know.
but this is something that can help and I always speak on taking care of the foundational aspects of health because people overlook that and they're like, what are the fads? I'm like, you don't sleep or drink or, eat, but you're going to talk about doing cryo. So I think it's important because sleep changes everything. And if you can't sleep, every other system is impacted by that. So it's so important to find things and not vilify things, just find things that are healthy, that can be absorbed naturally, that can assist your body in being the healthiest it can be. by, controlling those variables around foundational health. So important. What did you call it with the blood work?
And nutritional biomarker testing, or
No,
what?
not. It was the
I'm not sure what.
with the athletes, where when you were looking at like the foundational, the risk basically of what's going on, and
Root cause analysis.
Yes.
Okay. I wasn't sure what you were.
Analysis. Yes.
Okay, so that's not really risk. That's just figuring out.
Right. I was like the R. So no, the root cause analysis, I really like that because that's the foundation of what I do as well. And I just like the way you worded that because you're looking for the root cause to fix the problem and fix all the other problems associated with that instead of just putting a Band-Aid on top of it. So that's interesting. And I'm going to continue to send more people to you. Oh yeah. So the number one, I asked everyone the same questions just to see across the board what everyone says. The number one behavior change you think will lead to the biggest change in someone's life?
Well, that's not an easy question to answer.
Right? I'm like, in depth.
Number one behavior change that would lead to the biggest change in someone's life. Thinking sleep-related things would probably be if I'm picking what's going to lead to the biggest improvement in someone's life.
Yeah.
From working with a lot of athletes that are wearing an Oura ring or similar tracking type hardware, I find that deep sleep is pretty hard to come by, and that deep sleep is so restorative. And if I'm picking anything that can improve sleep, you're probably going to see an improvement elsewhere in your life. I mean, that's and behavior-wise, people do some stupid things before they go to bed, and everyone has seen the stuff of here's what you should do heading to bed, and no one does it.
Right. What have you seen improve deep sleep? Have you tracked that at all?
Yeah. So magnesium, from a nutritional biomarker perspective, if someone comes back low in magnesium, they're not going to get much deep sleep. But with the caffeine intake, you certainly see some concern there if someone's going way over the top with caffeine, especially later in the day. Even as simple as having spicy things for dinner, you kind of see that sleep quality suffers. It's been fascinating just because the Oura rings, now we're at a third generation one. I mean, it's kind of turned into a sleep lab on your finger. And so the athletes get a lot of feedback where they start to see, well, I know what I did before I went to bed last night and I had good scores today. So I'll take that, I'll repeat that, but now try making some other change. And so you can kind of start to apply some of those things repeatedly.
Well, Chris Talley, I appreciate you so much.
Thanks for having me on.
I just want to sit here and talk to you more and ask you more questions. I'm going to research a lot of what you said on just the deficiencies and what you're finding and the correlations that you're seeing. And I appreciate all of the information you've given us today and you coming out.
Right. Thank you.
No problem. Anything you want to promote, anything that you're doing, name your lab and just where you're located. Because I know people want to have access to something like this. I don't need any more.
Well, that's the problem. Is
I know. I do
I'm
the
kind of
same
near
thing.
Capacity, so
I
don't
know. I'm like, don't tell anyone anything about me ever again.
I know. I think I'm the only person that went on the Kardashians and had them cut out my name, my business name, my face. I didn't want any. I went the opposite.
It's so funny.
But the company name is Precision Food Works, and that's really the specialty area is nutritional biomarker testing.
Perfect. Well, interesting. And I appreciate you once again. Thank you for coming on. And until next time, because I know I'm definitely going to ask you more questions and have you on again. I appreciate it.
All right. Sounds good.
Thank you. Thank you again to everyone for joining us. And thank you to Chris Talley. It was such an amazing episode. It was so informative. And I hope you guys got a lot out of it. If you wanted or were interested in the CBD I was talking about today, Range, I try to support things that are scientifically backed so that we know the most about this product and it's the highest quality and your body's going to be able to absorb it and you're going to get the most benefit from it. So I stand by companies just like Range that do the best with what they have and they try to keep on improving in any way they can. So the code is in the description. Feel free to check out the product and we hope you enjoy it. If you try it and you like it, feel free to reach out and let us know what you think. Thank you again for joining us, and thank you again to Chris Talley for such an informative episode. We thank you so much. Have a great one.